Welcome back to the AI Ethics Now podcast, which explores the ethical dilemmas of AI in higher education and beyond. My name is Tom Ritchie, and today I'm really lucky to be joined by Professor Maya Ackerman, computer scientist, CEO, musician, and author of the new book, Creative Machines, AI, Art and Us. Maya, hello.
Hi, Tom. It's so great to be here. Thank you so much for having me.
No, thank you so much for joining. I'm really, really excited to be able to speak to you today about your work and learn a bit more about what you've written in Creative Machines. So, Maya, I wonder if you can tell us a little bit more about what brings you to this conversation on AI, please.
I think the best way to understand it is a stroke of luck. About 10 years ago, in 2015, when I was attending a small workshop in San Diego, and there was a small series of talks called computational creativity that caught my eye. So I walk into the room, and there are these beautiful paintings being splashed on the screen, and then I realized that this is art made by a machine? What? And then Harold Cohen, the maker of Aaron, one of the earliest machine painters that he started developing in the 1970s, he starts screaming how other people are calling his machine creative, but really he is the only voice of reason, telling them that he's a creative one. And that was a moment that switched me into studying creative machines, into studying generative AI, both as a researcher and soon enough as a founder as one of the earliest generative AI startups.
Thank you. Yeah, and I think the example of Aaron is a really interesting one. And again, you talk about it in Creative Machines. It's so great to hear that you almost came to this by accident. I know that when I speak to my students, they always feel that they need to have a very, very clear career path, that they know exactly where they want to go and what they want to do. And I try to convince them that it's these emergent opportunities that you have to be open to and be able to say, actually, that's what I'm interested in. And it feels like your example you gave by seeing that artwork and going, wow, what is this? Is a really great story to be able to share. So thank you.
I think it's actually never been more important to listen to your gut and to be willing to do something gutsy than right now because everything is changing.
It does feel like that. It feels like a really interesting time, I think, to be in education, particularly, and trying to speak to students about what the world may look like in the future with AI and their role in that. And I think that human AI relationship is perhaps not spoken about enough sometimes. We focus a lot on the technical aspects. We focus a lot on what can GPT-5 do compared to 4. But that kind of human in the loop discussion sometimes gets missed out. And I think it's great to be able to have the conversation with you. So, Maya, in your book, Creative Machines, you reflect on human creativity with its inner critics, its dependence on recognition, and even its ties to dreams. How should these realities shape the way that we think about machine creativity?
That's such a rich question. The inner critic itself is such a fascinating topic because it sort of modulates how creative we can be because of the nature of creativity. So the creative process consists of divergent thinking, where you sort of get out there and let yourself consider the possibilities, let yourself explore this massive open space. It's called kind of the creative search space. You need the inner critic to sort of take a nap while you let yourself do that. And then once you have something formed, once you nurtured it a little bit, at some point you need that inner critic to wake up and to give you some feedback, to edit, to consider how it relates to the work of other people, right? So at some point you need this convergent thinking. So in humans, even if we are doing it completely independently, we sort of need to be able to deal with this inner critic. With machines, it's really cool. The inner critic is sort of a level of confidence. So when a machine is being divergent, for example, my system Lyric Studio, what we built at my company Wave AI, helps you give ideas for the next line of lyrics. So we have to give you some outputs that are not just the most likely. The most likely is not going to be the most creative. It's going to be the least creative, right? So it's kind of the opposite of what ChatGPT is trying to do. So it's about AI can be on purpose exploring the space of unlikely possibilities so that you can go somewhere new. And on the other hand, AI can also be your critic. You can ask it to critique a piece of writing that you wrote. So, anyways, it's really cool to sort of see how this inner critic can be modulated in humans, in machines, but even most interestingly, in human plus machine collaborations.
And do you think that AI is perhaps more like our divergent side? And obviously, it is a reflection of us, throwing out these endless ideas and being kind of creative, as we would call it. You mentioned it has that inner critic role. Do you think that it's there yet? When I've used AI and when others use it, I tend to find it agrees with me, and it struggles sometimes to challenge me in the way that I want it to. When I say, "What do you think of these five ideas? Which one do you think?" And I just wanted to see if you had any reflections on the role it plays as that kind of convergent inner critic.
So actually, AI used to be a lot more divergent before it went mainstream. It was all about imagination. And a lot of the work that OpenAI did and a lot of other players that joined it was really to turn it into more of a search engine, more of a truth teller, which is a fictional idea, which is never really going to happen. But they've sort of tilted it in that direction as heavily as possible, constraining a lot of its creativity. Now, it's a funny thing, and like what you mentioned is true because it tends to want to please you, so it might agree with you too much to be your critic. But there are ways around it, and it's very, very good at it. There are specific critic bots inside of ChatGPT for various forms of writing, literally called critique bots that you can find. And they're very open and honest, especially the first time, right? If you then disagree with them, they might sort of capitulate. You can also just tell ChatGPT to be honest with you. So it kind of undoes some of this sycophantic behavior. It's actually an excellent critic. Now, it's important to not trust it blindly there as well, right? You want to activate your own critical abilities and see which critiques you agree with.
And I think you're right about it's that critical use of AI that I think is something that we're still working to, at least in my context with students, really get them to understand is not to just uncritically use some of these tools. I think going back to something else you said that I really liked about when you said what Wave AI does, you talk about how it would give you the next lyric line. Is it extending our creative search space, or do you think it's just narrowing it by drawing on patterns that it already knows that have been programmed into it?
Oh no, it's completely, it's all about taking you to places you haven't considered. And with the same sort of input, Lyric Studio will take a million different users in a million different directions. We don't think about AI like this because it doesn't match the science fiction narrative of the all knowing oracle, but actually, researchers were not constrained by this vision of the all knowing God AI. We built machines that would take humans to new places. And with new comes the risk of wrong, right? So when you're talking about art, the idea of wrong is less important. What should be the third line of your lyrics? What should be the first line of your lyrics if you want to write about our conversation or about the weather in Los Gatos, California today, right? Even if you constrain the space somewhat, you're still left with billions and billions and billions and trillions of possibilities for that opening line. And being able to navigate it is something that's very hard for the human mind. We're pretty repetitive in our thinking. And built right, a computer can be incredibly free and liberated.
Yeah, I think so. And it links really nicely to the next question. And we speak a lot in the space around the challenge of hallucinations that we see when we're using different AI tools. And you write about hallucinations extensively in your book, both human and machine. And you write about them as almost sparks of creativity rather than just errors or challenges within that system. And I wonder if you could reflect perhaps ethically on how do you think we can balance the potential beauty of hallucinations with the, again, potential dangers of misinformation that they can give?
I think the way that humanity talks about hallucinations and machines reveals more about us than anything else. Human thought is fundamentally based on hallucinations. We don't react to our sensory input. We take in our sensory information and then we try to predict what's going to come next in the next second, in the next minute, in the next hour, etc. There's great work by Neil Seth, a neuroscientist, proves that we're hallucinating all the time. The ability to hallucinate at a low grade is thinking, right? Humans can't think if they don't have their ability to imagine and predict. It's the same thing with machine. That's the reason machines are so powerful today, is because they're imagining. Now, this whole fear around, oh no, what do we do? The machine is lying to us is absurd, in my opinion. Who gave us the idea that the machine should be telling us the truth? Where did this nonsense came from? Humans don't agree with each other what the truth is. You can't share any political or almost philosophical thought without having a point of view. We are never going to have a neutral, all knowing oracle, and we need to stop trying to look for it. We need to stop treating our AIs like they're supposed to be truth dispensers. It's absurd at every level. We should fully expect them to make stuff up. regardless of how the companies try to fight against it. Did you know, for example, that the most imaginative and the most successful people tend to lie the most? Not necessarily on purpose, because just the way that they interpret reality is more creative. They lie to themselves more. And honestly, people who think that they're being perfectly objective all the time also tell themselves stories. That's just how thinking works.
And do you think we risk losing something kind of essential in that human AI relationship if we are demanding that AI always be factual and never imaginative? Can you see that there will be something lost there?
Yeah, I mean, the worst use cases come from that. That's where you have a student believe in AI when it just made stuff up. That's when people, the worst thing is when people come to human AI collaborations with their brain already turned off, already handing over all the responsibility, all the work to the AI. It's absurd. There's never been a more important time to believe in ourselves. And part of that is understanding that these machines are not only valuable, but beautiful in their imaginative nature.
And I really love that idea that you bring of kind of beautiful machines and the role that they can play, because I think a lot of what we've spoken about on this podcast, a lot of what I speak to my students about in the classroom, that idea of kind of the beauty of the machine is sometimes lost. We do look at them as kind of lines of code, and I think that the idea of the creative machine can get somewhat lost in there. And I really like as well, one of the themes that you return to again and again in the book is this idea of humility, the idea of kind of humble creative machines. And I wonder if you could speak a little bit more about what does humility mean in the context of AI, and why do you think it matters?
A humble creative machine would be willing to tell you when it's not sure about an answer. It's a level of humility that's desperately missing from current LLMs. But more broadly, let's think up for a moment about a person. I'm sure that as a brilliant person yourself, you have a lot of brilliant people around you, colleagues and friends. And I'm sure that at least one of them is a kind of person that is very proud of their brilliance. And if you try to work with them, they will try to sort of push you out and do it themselves instead because they feel that they know better. We've all met people like this, and some of them are genuinely very, very smart, but they're impossible to work with and they're demoralizing. And that's our AI systems today, most of them. Not all of them, but most of them. You can't iterate on your prompt with something like text to image models. If you want to change something, it restarts from scratch. Like it just doesn't want to work with us, and it's maddening, and people are not happy about it. On the other hand, we have human beings who want to elevate others. A lot of educators are like this. You can have a brilliant person with a brilliant brain, but they're directing their brilliance to elevate their students, right? They step out of the way when they can tell it's better for the person that they're trying to help. So we can have machines like that. And the reason ChatGPT is successful is because you can use it like this if you want to. But really, all of AI needs to move in this direction towards elevating human intelligence and creativity so that we can reach new heights.
And do you think it's something that we need to be building into the technology, or more about how we use it as humans and how we engage with it as more than perhaps a transactional machine that we ask a question and get the direct answer from? Or do you think we need to come at it from more of a almost transformational way of thinking about AI rather than just transactional?
100%. Yeah. So both are very, very, very important. So this all-knowing oracle myth that had been perpetuated by science fiction for decades is something that's impacting both users and the builders and investors. Investors, by the way, are super important in this whole formula. So if the investors and builders think about it as something that should replace humans, as something that's going to be smarter than us, then they're not giving us those interactive mechanisms. OpenAI wasn't thinking in this direction. They added the interactive mechanisms into ChatGPT, and ChatGPT wasn't their first LLM, right? It's they had GPT-3, which they were super proud of, right? But all of these were like virtually impossible for most people to interact with. So that interaction mechanism opens a door for different modes of relating to the machine. So the builders should do better. I mean, text to image models, video models, anything music related should be deeply, deeply, profoundly interactive. And it's something that the industry is understanding at snail speed, but it will get there eventually. Now, the users, first of all, it's our job to tell the companies what we want. We can tell them, make it more interactive. And they will listen because they want us to be happy users. So that's part of it. But also to the extent that we are able to interact with these AI brains, which are brilliant, by the way, we should be bringing in the mindset of a collaboration, right? And sometimes it's going to be frustrating, but at other times we are going to find ways to collaborate And that's where the best work happens. That's where the best work happens. Because these machines, I'm sorry, they're not smarter than us across the board. They're better at certain things. We're better at certain things. And that makes the collaboration so rich once you find your way into it. Oh, it's ChatGPT is a good example. Sorry, I keep going back into it because it really does have those opportunities, and it's such a great playground.
And something that you just said that has kind of sparked an idea is you said when we come to it. And it brings me to the next question, I suppose, which is we talk a lot about digital divides and there's a divide in AI between those who can access and those who struggle to access. And you talk a lot in your book about how creativity is shaped by privilege and by recognition and by existing kind of social structures. And I wonder, with that kind of digital divide in mind and some of the challenges we see around non-Anglophonic cultures and how they're engaging with AI, do you see AI as a tool that can democratize creativity or something that may in fact just amplify existing inequalities?
What I'm seeing, the trajectory that both what's happening right now and the trajectory that we're on is towards democratization. In fact, to a fairly scary level. And instead of being outbeat by people who have more resources, we might be replaced by machines, which is not any more comforting. And it's happening to some degree across various industries. So the solution here is really kind of what we've been talking about and creating those interfaces, and not just building smarter and smarter and smarter brains, but building those ways to interact with them. And that's going to prevent us from being replaced by the machines in this case. Yeah, I think it's a pretty clear democratization path. That being said, there are also opportunities for people with more resources to build their own custom AIs. At the moment, I'm not seeing this as an enormous threat to society, but it's a good one to highlight as one to watch for the future.
Yeah, for sure. And I wonder, have you given any thought to potential, I mean, either safeguards or cultural shifts that you think could help AI expand that creative circle rather than perhaps narrow it for specific groups?
It's what it's doing, right? It's a lot of these systems have a freemium model. The price points, granted, they're not free, but they're actually a lot less than buying a piano or, getting a whole bunch of studio material to paint. If anything, it's in that regard, I feel like it's moving in the right direction. But we need to think about how do we not get replaced by the very thing that's making it so accessible. I mean, I often don't think about it in terms of safeguards, in terms of aligning incentives. Everyone benefits if the tools make us smarter. I feel like we barely scratch the surface of our own creative abilities as humans, by the way. So if these tools can help us reach greater height as creatives, the companies win, the investors win, we humans win, instead of this replacive model where, there's a whole bunch of unemployed artists and people in other industries, which would just a devastating outcome.
Yeah, and it comes back to that discussion I see around AI of we want AI to be able to take the mundane tasks so that we can do the creative tasks. Whereas there is that slight fear that sometimes AI is applied to the creative tasks, which means we're left with the mundane tasks to do in our day-to-day jobs. And I think that balance of how we apply it in, my context in teaching or in a research space, I think is a kind of really interesting issue to see how that develops as we move forward and as the technology continues to develop, and also our understanding of ourselves. Something else I wanted to ask is that there are lots of arguments that I read about how machines can't really be creative because they lack either intention or what we perceive and understand to be emotion. And I wonder, after writing this book, where do you stand on that debate?
Oh, that's just delusion. It's really simple. It's a sign of wishful thinking. It would be nice if humans could keep creativity all to ourselves, right? Let's keep intelligence. Let's keep everything just to us. Then we can feel nice and safe. Creativity is novelty plus value. That's how it's been defined for decades in academia. It's not a perfect, but it's a very useful definition. So something needs to be new and it needs to be valuable in its context. So if it's a recipe, it needs to taste good to enough people. If it's art, it needs to have aesthetic value. And any creative process that reliably leads to creative products, to outcomes that are both novel and valuable, is a creative process. In case of humans, it tends to be an emotion centered process. We are incredibly emotional beings, okay? People who have the emotional parts of their brain damaged can't decide what to wear in the morning. Our art is an expression of our emotions. But it doesn't mean that it has to be like that. It doesn't mean that another entity, an alien or AI or an animal, can't be creative if it follows a different path that bypasses emotion, that perhaps bypasses intention as well. You can argue that evolution is creative. It's actually hard to argue against it without sort of artificially removing creativity for it because it reliably makes creative outputs. So the point is that we need to be careful to not delude ourselves because if we convince ourselves that machines are not creative because they're not emotional, then we're just denying reality and then we're unable to take the steps necessary to help shape the kind of world that we want to live in. And we sort of stay in this fake world where humans are the only creative ones.
And I think it's one of those things where we link creativity to consciousness, and there's so much of a discussion around consciousness in machines and AI that have we perhaps conflated that, and you say kind of deluded ourselves into thinking that as humans we're the only creative.
We're the only creative, the only intelligent, the only conscious, the center of the universe. We gradually learn that none of this is true. None of this is true, right? Like animals are conscious by virtually any definition. We're just trying to stay special. But it's okay. You know, I mean, I get it. I really do. I really do have empathy for this position. It comes from fears, and some of the fears are legitimate, right? We don't want machines to replace us at work. And so we try to comfort ourselves by saying they're not as good as us, right? But kind of in the same breath are afraid that they're going to replace us and are trying to claim that they're not good enough to ever compete with us. It's absurd. So I think reality and our emotional needs are not always well aligned. And it's helpful to sort of I think the only way that we create the kind of world that we want to live in is to face the sometimes uncomfortable truths.
Yeah, that's such a great way to look at it, that we take such an anthropocentric view of almost everything. You know, we are human, so therefore we're special, and therefore, as you say, the world revolves around all of us. And I mentioned cultural shifts earlier, and I wonder if AI could help in an interesting cultural shift away from looking at ourselves too much and realizing we are part of this bigger community of creative people, but also creative things, and that we have that. You mentioned the importance of that collaboration between humans and AI and the potential that comes with that. If it could lead to some sort of cultural shift into that space, that would be a really, really cool thing.
A cultural shift to make us less, less collectively narcissistic. That would be amazing. But I think the answer isn't just to be like hit over the head with a hammer, being told you're not special. I think the answer is realizing how incredibly special we already are without having to push anything else down. I think it's like I don't need to be the smartest, the most creative, and the most anything to feel that I'm special as a person, right? So maybe we need to just love ourselves without needing to be better. Maybe that's the answer. I don't know. There's something there.
What's really interesting about this line of thought is the development of AI is causing us to interrogate what it means to be human. And that's a really interesting kind of reflection on probably how most people come into these conversations. You probably wouldn't presume you're talking about what does it mean to be human in this world based on this technology, because I don't think we've done that previously with different technologies. And AI, the nature of it requires us to kind of look inwards a little bit more, which feels scary, as you say. There's some fear that's associated with that, but some real potentialities there as well. If we can harness that and speculate more on what could that look like in future, it feels like a really interesting thing to get into, of what does it mean to be human truly and creative kind of entities in this world that's powered by AI.
Tom, I think what you said there is fascinating. You said that the technology is getting us to ask what it means to be human. And if we look at this historically, something like the Industrial Revolution got us to think about ourselves in those terms. The clock was introduced, the workday became very rigid. We started treating people like machines. So actually, there's this amazing opportunity here, now that we have creative machines, to lean more into our own creativity, to understand how key creativity is to the human brain. Because while this technology is amazing, this technology is not the end. We have not fully imitated human capabilities, but we're not sure exactly what it is that's missing. Right? We co-evolve with the machines that we make, which are made, by the way, by a lot of researchers explicitly in order to understand ourselves.
And I think that's really interesting. And I feel like if you and I had a little bit more time, we could probably start to work towards what is that missing X factor of human creativity. I wonder the last question, Maya, for you today is one I ask all my guests, and it's what steps do you think that we can take to ensure a more positive future with AI, please?
Unfortunately, I don't think there's any bulletproof solutions, but we can pull towards replacements. There's a pull towards kind of greed fueled pull towards unemployment and unbelievable riches for the few while the rest of us suffer. But there's also a pull towards collaboration with these machines and more freedom and more creativity for people. And we should all, in our own way, be pulling in that directions as users of the technology, as people who can advocate to companies, asking for what we want, as investors, as builders, depending where you are in this formula, to do what you can to help counterweight the risks and not just try to say, okay, we're not going to allow companies to do XYZ, which is helpful, but that's only going to go so far, but also help move the world towards a kind of AI vision that would actually be good for all of us.
And I think that's a great gauntlet that you've thrown down, that it's all of our role. It's in all of our interest to engage with this and to not see it as a technology or something that exists over there. I think that so many discussions I have with perhaps people who aren't interested in AI yet, they just see it as a tool in the way that they saw the mobile phone or saw Google. And I really like that idea you've thrown there of we all need to engage with this. If we want the future to be positive, it's something that we as individuals, but as individuals of the human race, need to start thinking about in terms of what does it mean to be human? How can we completely engage with this? And what does that collaborative future look like? Maya, thank you so much for joining me on the AI Ethics Now podcast. It's been really great to speak to you about creative machines, AI art, and us, and just generally to have a chat about this space of kind of this human and AI interface that we're in the midst of at the moment. For anyone interested in reading more about Maya's book, Creative Machines, AI Art and Us, you can pre-order it now on Amazon and it will be available from October the 14th, 2025. Thank you so much and really looking forward to speaking to you again soon, and have a lovely rest of the day. Thank you.
Thank you so much for having me.
Thanks.